3 months ago, I never expected that a single dance in a Miami club would change my life forever. But when I saw Enzo Rocco, the notorious Godfather, watching me from across the room, his cold eyes locked onto mine like a predator spotting its prey, I knew my world was about to shift. He watched me move with a hunger in his gaze, one that promised danger, power, and a terrifying obsession. I should have walked away. I should have stayed away from a man whose reputation spoke louder than any words. But instead, I fell for him, a man who rules the underworld with an iron fist. And now, here I am, waking up in a dark, abandoned warehouse, my hands bound to a chair, the sound of gunfire growing closer with every passing second. I can hear the heavy footfalls approaching. I don't know if I'll make it out alive. But when the door bursts open and Enzo steps through, drenched in blood, his eyes filled with fury, I know one thing for certain: I am his. And as he cuts me free, his hands gripping me tightly, his voice low and threatening, "You're safe now. You're mine," I realize. No matter the cost, I would choose him over and over again, even if it kills me. The bass thumped in the background as I stepped onto the stage, the pulsating lights bouncing off the mirrored walls of Club Velvet. My body moved to the rhythm, each sway and spin captivating the crowd. I could feel every eye on me, but none like his. Enzo, the man with a reputation for being untouchable, sat in his corner, his sharp gaze never leaving me. His presence filled the room, and for the first time in my life, I knew that I wasn't just performing for an audience. I was performing for him. His power, his control, his influence. It all crashed into me in that single moment when our eyes met. And I knew then I was already in too deep. Enzo couldn't shake the image of her from his mind. Jasmine. Her every movement, every sway of her hips had burrowed deep under his skin, a fire he hadn't felt in years. He had seen countless women in his life, beautiful, powerful, seductive, but none like her. There was something raw, something dangerous about the way she moved on stage. She wasn't just dancing. She was telling a story that made every man in the club lean forward, eager to be a part of it. But not Enzo. He was different. He had always been in control, a man whose gaze alone could command loyalty or fear. But when her dark eyes locked with his, everything changed. The power he'd spent years building, the empire he'd carved out with blood and sweat, it all felt insignificant in that one moment. She didn't know it yet, but Jasmine had already crossed a line. She had unknowingly caught the eye of a man who didn't let go of what he wanted. And Enzo Rocco always got what he wanted. Sitting in his private booth, his cold, calculating exterior betrayed none of the emotions stirring inside him. His hand gripped the glass of whiskey in front of him, but he wasn't tasting the alcohol. He was tasting the heat of her body, imagining how it would feel to have her close, to make her his. The longer she danced, the stronger his obsession grew. He could feel it tightening in his chest, a need so primal that it consumed him. His men, ever present and watchful, kept their distance, knowing better than to speak unless spoken to. Enzo wasn't interested in small talk, not when his mind was so fixated on one thing. Without looking away from Jasmine, he nodded at Minjun, his right-hand man, who had been standing silently by his side. "Bring her to me," Enzo commanded, his voice low, but laden with intent. Minjun didn't hesitate. He had worked for Enzo for 8 years and had never heard him speak with such a sharp edge in his voice. This was not a request. This was an order. As the last notes of the song echoed through the club, Jasmine finally stopped dancing, her breath heavy, her body drenched in sweat, and a fire in her eyes that Enzo found intoxicating. She bowed gracefully to the crowd, the cheers echoing around her, but it was Enzo she was unaware of, the man who had just marked her with his gaze, a man whose attention she couldn't escape. Minjun stepped in front of her as she made her way off the stage, his tall figure imposing, but he spoke with polite courtesy, his tone one of respectful authority. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice smooth but firm. "My employer would like to speak with you." Jasmine hesitated for just a second, a small spark of curiosity flickering in her eyes as she looked past him to the VIP section where Enzo sat, his eyes never leaving her. She had felt it, the pull, the intensity of his stare. And though every part of her told her to walk away, her feet betrayed her, carrying her toward him as if something deeper was drawing her in. When she reached him, Enzo stood slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the floor. He didn't smile, but the cold authority in his eyes softened just slightly as he regarded her. He was not used to having to make any kind of effort to get what he wanted, but with Jasmine, it was different. She was a challenge, a puzzle that he was determined to solve. "Sit," he instructed, his voice a deep command. Jasmine, caught between fear and fascination, did as she was told, her body obeying the silent order as if it had no other choice. Enzo leaned forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're not like the others," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "And that's exactly why I need you." The air between them thickened, charged with an energy neither could deny. Jasmine felt it, the heat, the pressure. She was no stranger to men like him, but this man was different, and though she knew she should walk away, something deep inside her told her that, for better or worse, her life would never be the same again. Jasmine's pulse hammered in her ears as she followed Minjun through the winding hallways of Club Velvet. Each step felt heavier than the last, her body betraying her curiosity despite every instinct telling her to turn and run. She had danced for countless men, each one with his eyes fixed on her body, each one thinking they could possess her. But Enzo Rocco was different. His gaze had seared through her the moment their eyes met, leaving an imprint that she couldn't erase, no matter how hard she tried. As they neared the VIP section, the oppressive weight of his presence seemed to grow. The dim light flickered against the glass walls, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor. Minjun paused at the entrance, stepping aside with a deferential nod. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as she saw him, Enzo Rocco, the man who had haunted her thoughts since that first glance. He was standing by the bar, his back straight, his expression unreadable. The sharp cut of his suit, the way he moved with an ease that spoke of power and control, everything about him screamed danger. Yet it was the intensity in his eyes that held her in place, paralyzed by a mix of fear and something darker, more dangerous. "Please, have a seat," he said, his voice smooth, almost inviting, though the steel beneath it was undeniable. There was no warmth in his tone, only a commanding certainty. Jasmine hesitated, her gaze flicking from him to the empty seat across from him. She had been taught to never trust men like him, to always keep her distance. But there was something magnetic about Enzo, something that pulled her toward him even as every part of her screamed to resist. She sat, her movements stiff, her body betraying the unease she felt. The space between them felt charged, as if the air itself was waiting for something to happen. Enzo's eyes never left her face. He studied her with a focused intensity, as though memorizing every feature. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, unsure whether she was more afraid of his power or the way he made her feel alive in a way she couldn't explain. There was an undeniable pull between them, a tension that thrummed in her veins, but she refused to acknowledge it. She wasn't here to be anyone's plaything. "You've caught my attention," Enzo said, his voice low and steady. "And when that happens, there's no escaping it." He leaned forward slightly, the power in his posture palpable. "I don't make requests, Jasmine. I make demands." Jasmine stiffened at the sound of her name on his lips. "I don't know what you want from me," she replied, her voice betraying a tremor she couldn't control. Enzo smiled, but it wasn't a smile meant to reassure. It was a smile that promised he had already decided what he wanted. "I want you," he said simply, his gaze piercing through her defenses. "But not just for one night. I want to own you, in every way that matters. And I don't ask. I take." Her heart skipped a beat, and she forced herself to meet his eyes, trying to steady her breathing. The heat in his gaze was undeniable, and as much as she wanted to reject him, something deep inside her stirred, something she couldn't ignore. "You can't just take someone," she said, though her voice wavered. "Why not?" Enzo's lips curled into a slight grin, his eyes gleaming with something darker. "I'm the kind of man who takes what he wants, and right now, I want you." Jasmine felt a chill crawl up her spine. She was no stranger to the game men like Enzo played, but there was something unsettlingly real about the way he spoke, about the way he looked at her, as though she were already his. "You're a dangerous man," she whispered, a knot forming in her stomach. "And you're the one I've chosen to claim," he replied, his voice unyielding, "whether you like it or not." For a moment, the world around them seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of them in this tense, charged space. Jasmine knew she should get up and leave, walk away before she got caught in a web she couldn't escape. But the part of her that was drawn to him, the part she refused to acknowledge, kept her rooted in place. Enzo leaned back, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm not going to ask again. You'll come to me, or I'll make you." Jasmine's heart raced in her chest as she stepped out of the elevator and into the sleek, dimly lit hallway of Enzo's penthouse. The entire building felt like it was miles above the world, isolated, untouched, as though they existed in a bubble where nothing could touch them. She had expected his home to reflect the power he commanded, but nothing prepared her for the sheer coldness of it. The marble floors gleamed under the subtle lighting, the walls adorned with minimalist art that somehow made the place feel even more empty, more controlled. She had tried to tell herself that she wouldn't stay, that she would leave, get out of his world before it pulled her in too deep, but every step she took in that direction felt like a lie, because she knew, deep down, that she was already lost. Enzo stood by the window, his back to her, staring out over the Miami skyline. His silhouette was sharp, imposing, as though the city below belonged to him. The air between them was thick with tension, and Jasmine could feel it, a pressure in her chest that made it hard to breathe. "You're not like the others." Enzo's voice broke the silence, smooth and commanding, just like everything else about him. "Most women would have run by now, but you're still here." Jasmine swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She was caught, trapped between the pull of his presence and the terror that gnawed at her insides. She should have run. She should have walked away, but she didn't. She couldn't. The attraction was too strong, undeniable. "I don't belong here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not like the women you're used to." He turned to face her then, his gaze intense, like he could see through the walls she had built around herself. "No, you're not, and that's exactly why you're here." He stepped toward her, each movement purposeful, like a predator closing in on its prey. "You're different, and I want you." His words hit her like a physical force, a shock of heat that ran through her body, making her breath hitch. Jasmine wanted to take a step back, but her feet were rooted to the ground, trapped in his gaze, in the pull of him. She could feel the danger radiating off of him, and yet it was the warmth of his presence that she craved. When he reached her, his hand gently cupped her chin, tilting her face up to meet his. She could see the raw need in his eyes, an emotion so intense that it scared her. And yet, she couldn't look away. "Do you feel it too?" Enzo's voice was barely more than a growl as he leaned in, his lips grazing her ear. "The tension. The need. I've wanted you from the first moment I saw you." Her breath caught, and she could feel the heat of his body pressing against hers. "You're dangerous," she managed to say, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to warn him or herself. "Yes, I am," he whispered, his lips brushing her skin. "But you're the one I want." Before she could respond, his lips found hers in a kiss that was fierce, almost desperate. Jasmine's hands went to his chest, unsure whether to push him away or pull him closer. But the moment she touched him, she knew. She knew there was no turning back. The kiss deepened, his hands sliding to her back, pulling her flush against him. The heat between them flared, and all of Jasmine's doubts, all of her fears, seemed to fade into the background, drowned out by the intensity of his touch. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest, the power of it, the force of it. Enzo pulled away just enough to look at her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "You want this too?" he said, his voice dark with need. Jasmine's heart was racing, her body responding to him in ways she couldn't control. She didn't know if she was making a mistake, if she was about to lose herself completely, but in that moment, she didn't care. The danger he represented, the risk of it all, only made him more irresistible. She leaned in, her lips finding his once again, giving herself over to him completely. Jasmine's phone buzzed on the nightstand, its harsh sound slicing through the heavy silence of the penthouse. She rolled over, still tangled in the warmth of Enzo's sheets, and reached for it without thinking. Her eyes were heavy from lack of sleep, but the text on the screen made her pulse quicken. "They're coming for you." Her fingers trembled as she quickly typed back, but before she could send a response, the power in the building cut out with a deafening thud. The lights flickered once, then died, leaving her in an oppressive darkness. She sat up, heart hammering in her chest, a chill creeping over her skin. The panic hit her like a punch to the stomach. She wasn't alone in this city anymore. Enzo had warned her, told her the price of being with a man like him, the dangerous world that came with him, but the fear she felt now wasn't just about being with him. It was about what she had become in his life, what she had come to represent to those who wished to hurt him. She was a weakness, and they were going to exploit it. She was about to text Enzo when the door to the bedroom burst open. Two masked men stepped inside, moving quickly, their hands grabbing her before she could react. She barely had time to scream before one of them slammed his hand over her mouth, muffling the sound. "Get her out of here," one of them growled, his voice thick with an accent she couldn't place. They yanked her out of the bed and dragged her toward the hallway, the cold air biting at her skin as they forced her down the stairs. Her heart pounded in her chest, a primal fear rising in her throat. She fought against them, but their grip was iron, and it only made her more desperate. The last thing she saw before they shoved her into the back of a van was the empty hallway and the faint echo of her own voice, screaming for help that no one could hear. Enzo's phone buzzed, the harsh ring cutting through the quiet of his office as he pored over the papers, his mind preoccupied with the ever-growing tension in his world. He picked it up without looking, his hand still holding the whiskey glass he'd been toying with for the last 10 minutes. A single word flashed on the screen. "Jasmine." He froze. Enzo's heart stopped for just a moment before he dropped the glass onto the desk, his eyes darkening with an instinct that came from years of surviving in a world where trust was rare and danger was constant. The familiar tightness in his chest spread like wildfire. He wasn't fast enough. The phone rang, and this time Enzo didn't hesitate. He answered without a word. "Boss, it's bad." Minjun's voice crackled over the line, urgent and shaky. "They've got her." Enzo stood, his body moving like a machine, fueled by fury and fear in equal measure. His eyes burned with a fire that had no place in a man who had ruled the underworld for decades. They had taken her, his woman, his only weakness. "Where is she?" Enzo's voice was low, but the threat was clear. "They're holding her at the old warehouse near the docks," Minjun replied. "We've already lost time." Enzo didn't need to hear more. He was already halfway to the door, his coat flying behind him. He was a man used to control, but Jasmine had disrupted everything, and now someone would pay for it. As he drove through the dark streets, his mind raced. Jasmine had become his world, and now his enemies had taken her, using her as leverage to break him. The question wasn't whether he would get her back. It was how many people he would have to destroy in the process. His phone buzzed again, and Minjun's voice filled the car. "We're moving in, but we don't know what we're up against." Enzo's grip on the wheel tightened, his knuckles white. His enemies would soon realize that the one thing they had underestimated was his capacity for rage, and the people who took Jasmine would wish they had never come close to crossing him. The warehouse loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the pale glow of the city lights. Enzo's pulse hammered in his ears as he gripped the steering wheel, the sound of his breathing the only thing louder than the roar of the engine. He could feel the anger bubbling inside him, threatening to spill over, but he pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. Jasmine was inside that building, and nothing would stop him from getting her out. Minjun and his men flanked him, their eyes steely with resolve. They were all familiar with Enzo's temper, but even they knew there was a depth to it tonight that had never been seen before. His enemies had crossed a line, and now they would pay the price. The van skidded to a stop in front of the warehouse, and Enzo was out of the car before the engine even cut off. He moved like a shadow, quick, silent, purposeful. Minjun and the others followed, their guns drawn, ready for whatever waited inside. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of their boots hitting the concrete floor echoed through the darkened space. Enzo's mind was a blur of rage and fear. He had never felt so vulnerable. Jasmine had become his everything, and now she was in the hands of the people who would use her to break him, but he wouldn't let them. He couldn't. The doors to the warehouse were wide open, and the cold air stung his skin as he stepped inside. His eyes immediately locked onto the figure sitting in the center of the room, Jasmine. Her hands were bound to the back of a chair, her head bowed, her body trembling. Her hair was messy, and her clothes were torn, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. The sight of her hit him like a punch to the gut. For a brief moment, his breath caught in his throat. The overwhelming need to rush to her almost paralyzing him. But he didn't move. Not yet. He was too aware of the danger that still lurked in the shadows. From the far corner, a voice broke the silence. Well. If it isn't the great Enzo Rocco. Enzo's eyes flashed toward the man emerging from the shadows. Minho Vulov, the Russian. Enzo's enemies had been playing their games for years, but this was different. Minho had crossed the line by targeting Jasmine. He had made it personal. Enzo's voice was low, but it cut through the air with a deadly calm. Let her go, Minho. This ends tonight. Minho's lips curled into a smirk, his cold blue eyes glinting with amusement. You think you can just walk in here and take her? She's the only thing you care about, Rocco. And now, she's my leverage. Enzo took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. If you think for 1 second that I'll let you use her to get to me, you're gravely mistaken. Without warning, Minho's men began to move, their guns raised. Enzo's men followed suit, the warehouse quickly turning into a battlefield. Shots rang out, the sound deafening, but Enzo's focus never wavered. His eyes were fixed on Minho, and he wouldn't stop until Jasmine was safe in his arms. The chaos around him faded into a blur. Enzo moved with precision, taking out anyone who stood between him and the Russian. Minho's smug expression faltered as he realized just how far Enzo would go to protect the woman he loved. In a final, brutal confrontation, Enzo slammed Minho against the wall, his fist connecting with the Russian's jaw. You've made your mistake, Minho, Enzo snarled, his voice dripping with fury. I told you, she's mine. With one final, bone-crunching punch, Minho crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Enzo stood over him, chest heaving, his eyes wild with rage. But his gaze quickly shifted to Jasmine, still tied to the chair, her eyes wide with fear and relief. Enzo rushed to her side, his hands trembling as he cut the ropes that bound her. When her hands were free, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he could protect her from everything in the world. His lips brushed against her forehead, his voice a whisper. I've got you. You're safe now. You're mine. And as he held her, surrounded by the wreckage of his enemies, Enzo knew one thing for certain. He would burn this entire world to the ground if it meant keeping her safe. Enzo stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the Miami skyline, But his mind was far from the city below. His thoughts were on Jasmine, on everything he had done to keep her safe, and the lengths he would go to ensure she was never threatened again. The events of the past few days had changed him. The rage he'd felt, the desperation to get her back, had stripped away the layers of control he'd built around himself. For the first time, he realized what it truly meant to care for someone, to love someone so fiercely that you were willing to tear down your entire world to protect them. Behind him, Jasmine's soft footsteps echoed across the polished floors of his penthouse. He didn't need to turn to know she was there. Her presence had become a part of him, the way her scent lingered in the air, or the sound of her breathing in the quiet moments. She was his anchor in a world that had always been ruled by chaos. "Enzo," she said, her voice tentative but strong. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, savoring the sound of her voice. "I'm sorry," he muttered, turning slowly to face her. "I'm sorry for everything, what I brought you into, the danger, the fear." Jasmine's eyes softened as she walked toward him, her footsteps light on the hardwood floor. She stopped in front of him, reaching up to gently touch his face, her fingers tracing the sharp lines of his jaw. "You didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice soothing, as if she were trying to calm him, to calm them both. But Enzo shook his head, his expression hardening. "No, I didn't. But I let you get pulled into it. I made you a target, Jasmine. I can't forgive myself for that." She sighed softly, her thumb brushing against his skin, and for a moment the weight of the world seemed to fall away. She didn't have to say it. He knew she understood. Jasmine had seen him at his worst, had been caught in the wake of his violent past, but still, she was here. She hadn't run, hadn't turned away, and for that, Enzo would never take her for granted. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. "But you can't keep living like this. You can't keep dragging me into your world, Enzo. We both deserve better." Her words struck him deep. He had always known what his life had cost him, but hearing it from her, hearing her lay it bare, made him face the truth. His empire, his criminal empire, was a prison, and he had kept himself chained to it, even as it slowly suffocated everything around him. Enzo stepped away from the balcony, his hands curling into fists as the weight of his decision settled over him. "I won't drag you into it anymore," he said, the resolve in his voice firm, though the words felt like they were being torn from him. "I'm done, Jasmine. I've built this life on lies, on blood, and it's time to tear it down. You deserve more than the man I've been. You deserve a future." Jasmine's eyes locked onto his, her gaze unwavering. "And you can have it," she said softly, a quiet strength in her voice. "You don't have to be the man you were anymore. You're more than that. You're better than that." Her words reached into his chest, and for the first time in years, Enzo felt something resembling hope. He had spent so long convincing himself that the life he had built was the only life he could have, but Jasmine had shown him a different way, a way out, a way forward. "I'm going to make it right," he vowed, his voice steady but filled with the weight of a man who had just made the hardest decision of his life. "No more blood, no more lies. I'm going to protect you, Jasmine. I'll burn the world down if I have to, but I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Jasmine reached for his hand, her fingers curling around his with the same trust she had always given him, even when he didn't deserve it. "Then let's build something new, together." In that moment, Enzo knew there was no turning back. The past had shaped him, but it didn't define him. And with Jasmine by his side, he would do whatever it took to build a future that was his own, one where she was safe, one where they could finally have the life they both deserved. Jasmine stood at the window, watching the city come alive beneath her. Miami's skyline stretched out like a glittering promise, the lights twinkling in the distance, oblivious to the storm brewing in her heart. The penthouse felt colder than it had in days. She had never been one to be afraid of the dark, but now, standing here in the silence, the weight of her decision pressed heavily on her. Enzo had done everything he could to protect her, But the danger was still there, looming, threatening. She had seen the price of living in his world. The bloodshed, the power struggles, the cold indifference of men who didn't care who they hurt as long as they got what they wanted. She had been pulled into that world, whether she liked it or not. But now, she was standing on the edge of a choice. Could she walk away from him? Could she really leave the man she loved, the man who had given her everything, even when he had nothing to give? She had been forced to confront her fear over and over again. Every day she lived in Enzo's world. She felt it, the constant threat of something happening to him, to her. But every time she thought about leaving, about running, something inside her fought back. Enzo had promised to protect her, and somehow she believed him. But the question was, could she live in this world with him? Could she be a part of it without losing herself? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her, and she turned to see Enzo standing in the doorway, his dark eyes studying her with that same intensity that had first pulled her in. His expression was unreadable, his face a mask of quiet determination, but she could see the question in his gaze. "I know what you're thinking," he said softly, his voice low, almost hesitant. "You're scared." Jasmine didn't answer right away. She couldn't, because he was right. She was scared. She had every reason to be, but the fear she felt now was different from before. It wasn't just the fear of the unknown anymore. It was the fear of losing him. "I'm not scared of you," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt deep inside. "I'm scared of this world, of what it will do to you, to us." Enzo took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His hand reached out to touch her cheek, his thumb gently brushing away the tension that had built up there. "This world is my burden, Jasmine, not yours. I'll take the risk for both of us." She looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there, the raw vulnerability beneath the tough exterior. "But it's not just your risk anymore, Enzo," she whispered. "It's mine too. I'm part of your world now, for better or worse." Enzo's gaze softened, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. And in that moment, Jasmine knew, no matter how dangerous it was, she couldn't leave him, not now, not when the bond between them had grown stronger than the fear. "I'll protect you," Enzo murmured against her hair, his voice firm, like a vow he would never break. "I'll make sure nothing happens to you, but you need to trust me. You need to trust us." Jasmine closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his embrace, the security he offered. She had learned that life with Enzo was a delicate balance between love and danger, between passion and pain. But as she held on to him, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her ear, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it with him. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice filled with resolve. "I'll stay. I'll navigate this world with you, whatever it takes." Enzo pulled back slightly, his eyes searching hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to smile, a small, relieved smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Then we'll face it together," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise you, Jasmine, nothing will tear us apart." And in that moment, with the world outside still uncertain and dangerous, Jasmine knew that as long as she was with Enzo, she could face whatever came next. Together, they would carve out their own future, one step at a time, in the dangerous world they both now shared. Enzo stood in the center of the penthouse, staring out over the city that had both built and nearly destroyed him. The lights of Miami twinkled like distant stars, each one a reminder of the life he had crafted with his own hands, built on power, fear, and blood. But now, as he looked at it, he realized it no longer mattered. The empire he had once fought so hard to maintain, to expand, had become the very thing that threatened to rip everything he cared about apart. Jasmine. She had changed everything. She had come into his world like a whirlwind, pulling him from the dark corners he had built around himself, showing him that there was more to life than control and domination, more to life than the endless games of power he had played for years. She had given him a reason to fight, not just for survival, but for something real, something worth living for. His gaze shifted to the woman who had become his everything. Jasmine stood by the window, her back to him, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the setting sun. She was a part of this city now, a part of his world, and he would be damned if he let anyone hurt her. "Jasmine," he called softly, his voice barely more than a whisper. But it was enough to draw her attention. She turned, her eyes locking with his, and for a moment, everything else in the world faded into nothing. She was his focus, his purpose, and he knew without a shadow of doubt that he could never lose her. She crossed the room toward him, her movements graceful, like a dance he could never predict. He reached out to her, pulling her close, needing to feel her warmth against him, to ground himself in the reality they had built together. "We're ready," Enzo said, his voice steady but filled with an intensity that had become familiar between them. He had spent the past few weeks rebuilding what he had nearly lost. The connections, the alliances, and most importantly, the control he had let slip. He was no longer just the Godfather. He was someone with a future now, their future. Jasmine's eyes softened as she looked up at him, understanding what he meant. "You've taken control back," she said quietly. "But you did it for us." Enzo nodded, a small but genuine smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. To keep us safe." He had called in every favor, used every piece of leverage he had, but this time it wasn't just about business. It wasn't about showing strength or maintaining dominance. It was about securing their future, a future that didn't have to be dictated by violence or fear. "I've made sure the Russians know that this is my city now," Enzo continued, his hand brushing through Jasmine's hair. "They'll stay out of it. No one will threaten you again. I'm putting an end to the chaos, Jasmine. This life, our life together, will be built on something real." Jasmine's heart swelled with emotion, her chest tight with the weight of his words. He had done it. He had chosen her, chosen their future over the empire he had once ruled with iron fists. "And what happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Enzo looked at her, his gaze softening. "Now we live," he said simply, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "We live how we choose, together." Jasmine smiled, the weight of the past few weeks lifting from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. Free to love him, free to build a life with him, and for the first time, Enzo felt the same way. His past, his criminal empire, it didn't define him anymore. What mattered was the woman in his arms, the life they had ahead of them, and for that, he would fight with everything he had. "Together," she echoed, her voice filled with certainty. And as they stood there, the city stretched out before them, Enzo knew one thing for sure. He had found his home, and it was in her arms.